Hello, my name is Reed, and this is my presentation for the book talk. The book that I chose for this is called The Strange Career of Jim Crow. There's a PowerPoint I'm reading off of that is included in the email. Strange Career of Jim Crow is published in 1955. The author, C. Vann Woodward, he was a scholar, a historian. He was born in 1908. He won a Pulitzer Prize as well. And in the 1950s, he was a civil rights leader, like kind of a liberal figurehead, sort of. His most influential book is The Strange Career of Jim Crow, that Martin Luther King referred to as the Bible of the Civil Rights Movement. So on to the book, Strange Career of Jim Crow, published in 1955, but there's been various revisions. I think the most recent one is 1965. So it's come through the civil rights era, or the fruition of the civil rights era. And this book discusses the origins of the segregation laws in the 19th and 20th century, which is known as the Jim Crow laws. He argues that segregation was not just inevitable, like it wasn't a guaranteed thing, but it was instead like a very political, like intentional thing that happened, not just there was a natural result. Explains the period of Reconstruction, the different political parties, how support for black voters changed throughout that time. And I read this book for a history course back in about a year ago. It kind of dismantles the argument for segregation and kind of catalogs the way that it was kind of torn down. And the book is really like engaging, and you really get to understand like the real reason of things. He provides a lot of primary sources, a lot of firsthand accounts of what was happening and the thoughts around segregation even during slave times and after that, and how everything kind of fell apart, so to speak, after the Reconstruction, after the North left the South, the end of Reconstruction. So my selected teaks related to this book would be, this is 8th grade history, and it says the student understands the effects of Reconstruction on the political, economic, and social life of the nation. The student is expected to evaluate legislative reform programs, radical Reconstruction Congress, and reconstructed state governments. That's A. C is to explain the economic, political, and social problems during Reconstruction and evaluate their impact on different groups. In regards to the overall teaks here, talking about Reconstruction, political, economic, social life, this book directly correlates that. It talks about, the Democrats, the Republicans, the Populist Party, the economic hardship that happened in the 80s, how poor white and poor black initially came together, but as things got harder, they separated, and black people became a scapegoat for economic problems. Discusses many different things relating directly to that teaks. And then, the radical Reconstruction and the state governments. Again, that's a very, very crucial point, as he talks about the state governments and how they were made up and how the different voters had rights to vote, and then those are taken away from African Americans over time. And then the other one says explain economic, political, social problems during Reconstruction and their impact on different groups. Again, kind of repeating myself, but it talks about the Populist Party, the African Americans, in the South, in Congress, in politics, and how, this era greatly affected and shaped so many different groups, and obviously set things in place that wouldn't be undone for, 70 or 80 years, referring specifically to Jim Crow segregation. It talks about the Reconstruction area and the effects that it had on society. Possible assignments with this book that I've kind of cataloged here is one would be discuss the various political parties that Woodward outlines during Reconstruction going into the 20th century in a 3 to 4 paragraph essay. Students would kind of go through mostly the first half of the book that talks about this and kind of go through and catalog that, use specific examples in the essay. This might be like a full credit type class or an advanced class, because some of these concepts are historiographical concepts. And then and the simpler one is kind of gather into groups of 3 or 4 and share the most impactful thing that you learn from the book. I know personally speaking, for me, when I read this book, I was so impacted by the true story of how segregation unfolded and how not everybody wanted segregation. In fact, many people couldn't even understand a reason for it. It didn't make any sense to them. It wasn't that they thought blacks were equal, but they didn't understand why they would have to be completely separated from whites. It didn't make any sense to them. Even in slavery period, there was still contact between black and white. So the notion of segregation of every single facet of public life, private venues and businesses, was just way too extreme for a lot of people, and it wasn't even the majority that wanted that. It was over time it kind of crept in, and eventually, after the right of African Americans taking away to vote, obviously that's when there's no concern for their constituency and things go really, really downhill for them. And so that was really, really impactful for me. So I think the discussion of this book in a classroom setting I have read it in college, but I think it could also be adapted to the high school level, even the junior high level, if it's kind of disseminated a little more easily, discuss specific themes. But yeah, that's about it for the book talk. I really enjoyed getting to go over this book and to relate this book with the Teeks and how it's impacted me, even having read it a year ago. So it's something I kind of want to get back to, actually, and go through again as I kind of continue and be a history teacher and that sort of thing. So thank you so much for watching.